Good day, viewers at home. Welcome to Home Learning. This is SGCSE English Language. Since we are nearing our exams now, so I thought it would be a good idea for us to be looking at continuous writing. And in continuous writing, we know that it forms paper 2 of our English language examination. All right, so in paper 2, we usually have 3 different exercises there. That is exercise 1, exercise 2, and exercise 3. So we are going to be looking at exercise 3 today, where we find 3 elements or 3 questions rather on exercise 3. Those questions are, you'd find a narrative composition there, and then there will be a descriptive composition too, and then also there will be an argumentative composition. As for an argumentative composition, that is a topic that we've already dealt with in the previous lessons. So the remaining ones are only the 2, which is a descriptive and a narrative. So composition writing, it is our main focus for today's lesson. But of the 2, that is a narrative and a descriptive composition, today we are mainly looking at the narrative. And then in the subsequent lessons, we are also going to look at a descriptive composition. All right. A narrative composition, one may say that it is the most popular one, especially with students, because we are always told that it is easy to write a narrative than it is to argue or maybe to describe. But then, however, we cannot all or rather agree with that, because we have got different skills, and then each one of us is better in one or the other. So we cannot all say that a narrative is easy, but relatively it is said that a narrative is easy, because for a narrative composition, the only thing that you need to do is to tell a story. And then what makes it easy is the fact that the story should not necessarily be a fact. So you can create something. That is why it is called a composition, because you need to compose. All right? So when you compose, it means that you create something. That whatever story that you create could be on something that really happened, or it could be something of your own creation or imagination. All right, so it doesn't necessarily have to be something that is true. That makes it easier in that way, and you just have to narrate. All right, you just have to narrate from the beginning until you get to the end a certain story, but of course you'll be guided by the prompt that you'll be given. Basically, that is the title of that particular narrative composition. So why do we narrate? That is the most important question we can ask ourselves. Why do we have to narrate? We narrate basically because we are telling a story. And the one thing that makes us to narrate is the fact that we want the person who is reading, or at times listening, because even in speech we do narrate. All right, we want the person to see the things and experience the story, the events as they happened in the story. And that is important. Even when writing, you need to do the same thing. I'll take an example. Let's say you've watched a very interesting movie, and then in that movie you would like a friend to watch that movie too, or maybe you'd like to narrate what happened in the movie to a certain friend of yours. And then the way you're going to tell what happened in that movie, you are going to include all the details that are important. And you'll make sure that the way you tell that particular story or narrate the way things happened in the movie, your friend should be interested, and you want to grab the attention of your friend. And then you're going to, in order for you to grab the attention of your friend in telling that particular movie, you need to employ certain strategies to make sure. That will be demonstrations, for example. It's part of the things that you'll be doing. Maybe the change of tone of your voice while telling the movie. You want to make sure that your friend is captured, all right? Is paying attention in whatever that you are saying. So that too, the way you tell a movie to a friend of yours should be the same way you write down. Because here, when you write down, you are going to have a reader. and the reader is your audience. All right? So you have to imagine that there's a reader here, there, that I'm telling this story, and then I should make sure that I tell the story in a way that is going to interest the reader. Let's forget about it being an examination. Let's forget about the reader being a marker. Just take the reader as, or rather the marker as a reader. You are telling a story to a certain audience, and the audience happens to be the reader, and the reader in this case is the marker. So that it should come rather in that chronology. All right? Instead of it saying, okay, I'm writing, I want to impress the marker. No. First of all, tell yourself that you want to impress the reader. You want the reader to be interested in reading your story. All right. So that is the important part that I feel I needed to point out before we actually get into the part of our narrative writing and the mechanics and all the art and the stylistics that are involved in narrating a story. So that is very, very important when we do a narrative composition or a narrative essay. Let's now look at it closely at what a narrative is. So what is a narrative? A narrative, we say that it is a story, all right? So a narrative, we are telling a story, and when we say that, everyone would like to listen to an interesting story. You don't want to tell a story and you find that the people are already fast asleep. That will basically be a sign that your storytelling, it's either the storytelling or the story itself, the subject, the content of your story is not that much interesting, or maybe the art of telling the story is the one that has got a problem. So you want to make sure that even in your writing, you create a story that is readable, all right? That a story that one is interested or gets interested in reading. So a narrative is a story, but what kind of a story is a narrative? It is a story that is one there told by a particular person, all right? It is a story that is told by a particular person from a particular perspective. And again, that story involves a logical sequence of events. Underline this one, logical sequence of events. And then again, it is carried out by a certain individual. What is carried out by certain individuals? It is whatever happens in the events, that is, the events that happens in the story, they are carried out by certain individuals. And again, they do that in a specific time and place. Mind this, specific time and place. So in a specific time and place, and also finally for a particular purpose. So there should be that purpose of telling the story. So we go over it again. A narrative is a story told by a particular person from a particular perspective, involving a logical sequence of events carried out by certain individuals in a specific time and place for a particular purpose. All right, let's now try to dissect this and look at it at each and every of these points. When you say that it is told by a particular person, who is that particular person? And then from a particular perspective, which are the different perspectives that you can tell the story from, and then the logical sequence and everything. Each of these points, let's just look at them closely now. So right now, here are the elements, therefore, of a narrative. That in a narrative essay or a narrative composition, we're going to have these following people or these following elements in that narrative. So in the narrative, we are going to have a narrator. Okay, we are going to have a narrator. A narrator, basically, this is the person who tells the story. And then in this case, you are the narrator. All right? So in this case, it is you. And then in this case, you are going to use I, that is for yourself. And then from a certain point of view, it's basically the person who tells the story. Is he telling the story from a personal point of view, that things are happening or events are occurring to you, which means that you're going to use the first person I, or you are telling a story where another third party is involved, where you're going to use the third person narrative, that person being he, she, they, and all of those. And then again, in that story, you are going to have what is called a plot. And then a plot, basically, this means the unfolding of the events. What are the things that are going to happen there? So these is the unfolding of events there. That creates the plot of your story. And again, a narrative is going to have people who are going to live or inhabit that world that you have created of the story. All right? And those people, we call them characters. All right? Those people who will be living in your story, we call them characters. And then again, we've got the setting. The setting, basically, this is the place where things are happening. And then the characters, we said that these are the people. And then here, this is the place, and not just the place, but the time too. So this is the setting. When is it set? Where is it set? All right, that story. And then for that particular purpose. A purpose of narrating, it can be rather to inform. That is one purpose. And again, maybe to entertain. That's another purpose of telling a story. Or it can be to educate. It may be to create fear, or maybe to share an experience. So these are different purposes. They are not limited to this. There's just too many of them. Purposes of telling a particular story to whichever audience that you have. All right. So now we are looking at it closely. Let's go back to the first part where we said that a narrative is a story that is told by a particular person, and then that particular person is called a narrator. All right. So a narrative, we said that is a story told by a particular person, and that person, we said, is called a narrator. And then in this case, you as the writer, you will be the narrator. All right. As the writer, you will be the narrator of the story, because the story is told by you. So everything will be expected from you. You will be expected to know all the details. So you will be expected as the narrator to give all those necessary details in your particular story. All right. So that is the first part of this narrative, which is said that it is a story that is told by a person, and then the person is called a narrator. And then we said that in this case, the narrator, it is you, the student, who is the writer, who writes the story. You are the narrator. And as you are the narrator, you are expected to have all the details that are important. And you are expected to also give those details, not just to have them, but you also have to give the details. And then that is why it is important, before you create the story, make sure that you've got the details to tell about that particular story. All right, so it is important that you have the details to tell from that particular story. All right, so again, when you continue with this discussion, we're saying that, furthermore, a narrative is a story that is told from a particular perspective. All right, it is a story that is told from a particular perspective. In this case, I think you have read a book, or read a novel, read a story where you find that the narrator knows everything. The narrator is omniscient. All right. It means that he is there. He knows everything. He can get into the thoughts of the characters. All right. He knows what they are thinking. He knows what they are saying. He knows where one is in terms of location and space and time and everything. He knows that. So you as a narrator, again, you can assume that you can tell the story from which point of view. All right. The point of view in this case, in a narrative, we can either use the first person narrative where it is about you. That is a story that is about you, I, which means that here things will be happening to you. Here things will be happening to you. You will be experiencing everything that happens there, or rather, you are the central part, or maybe the the central focus of everything that happens in the story. You've got to have to do something with it. People, the rest of the people that are there are going to influence whatever is going to be experienced by you. And then the rest of the people I'm talking about are those that whenever you include them in your story, you are going to refer to them using the third person. All right. So the third person, basically, I can say those that you're going to refer to in the third person are the other characters in the story. So remember, we said that every story should have characters in it. There should be people that are living in the story. So the other characters are going to be referred to in the third person, which means that the point of view that you're going to tell the story is you're going to use the first person and the third person. And then again, it is an advice that whenever you create a narrative composition or whenever you create a story, make sure that you are part of the story. It involves you so that you're able to use the first person. All right. It is more interesting to the reader, and then it evokes feelings from the reader. The reader is able to empathize with you when you are the central focus, when things are happening to you, other than when you are telling a story from a third person perspective, where you're just narrating something that happened or was experienced by someone else. Let you be the experiencer of those things. Things should happen to you as the writer. All right, so it becomes more interesting. It is easy even for you as the writer to write something and make sure that you evoke a certain response from the reader, because these things are happening to you, and then the reader is going to empathize with you easily when things are happening to you, rather than when you are telling something bad that happened to someone else. All right, it doesn't evoke that because it is a bit far removed than when things are happening to you. So it becomes more interesting. All right, so these are the point of views that you're likely to use whenever you write a narrative: the first person and the third person. The first person, because we advise that things should happen to you. You should be the central focus of the story. You should be the one who experiences these things. All right. And there'll be a third person because you are not the only one. Likely, you are not the only one who will be in the story. There will be a friend, for example. There will be a parent. There will be whoever. There will be someone who does something bad to you. Of course, if maybe, okay, rather depending on the title of the question, or rather the prompt of that particular essay you are writing. So that antagonist that has to be there in that story, you can always refer to as in the third person. So both points of view, it's not a matter of choosing between the first person and third person here. Both points of view are likely to be there rather in a narrative composition, because you're going to use the third person when referring to other people that are involved or inhabit your story. All right, so now moving forward, so we said that it is a story that is told from a particular perspective by a particular person. All right, moving on, we get to the third part there. That story should follow or involve a logical sequence of events. So that is important too. You tell a story that follows a certain logical sequence of events. It shouldn't be just all over the place, and it is such that it is difficult to follow. So your story should have a beginning and an ending. And while you tell the story, it should be clear that this event follows this one, and after this event, there was this event, building up to the main purpose of your writing. Okay, so that too is important. So it is a story that involves a logical sequence of events. Logical sequence of events, basically, this is about the plot of your particular story. And then we did say that the plot here basically refers at the way the events unfold in your story. And we said that this is the unfolding of the events. And the unfolding of the events, this is where you have to make sure that you create interest to the reader. The way you tell the story, make sure that you create interest to the reader. So you create interest and make sure that you use all the mechanics that are to be used whenever you want to create interest in the reader. So here, for the plot to be, or rather for your story to follow a certain logic or a logical sequence of events, the one important thing which we can never overemphasize is that you need, as the writer, to plan. Planning is key. Plan your essay before you actually write. So you need to plan your essay or your composition before you put pen into paper, all right, where you begin. It is not a matter of thinking as you write, planning as you write. No, you need to carefully plan your essay so that you are able to make sure that it follows a logical sequence of events. You know, in your planning, I'm sure that you've been taught planning your essay at your respective schools by your respective teachers. All right, so here you need to plan, and then when you plan, we know that you've got, your story should have what is called a beginning, and also it should have an ending. All right, so your story should have a beginning, and whatever happens in the story should take us to an ending. It shouldn't be just a mixed up sequence or rather events where we are not sure when exactly did this happen. Did it happen after or it happened before? Right? So you cannot basically tell a story and say, okay, fine, I woke up, I went to town, and then when I got to town, I bought the things that my mother had asked me to buy, and then I got back home, and then now you are home, and then you take us back to town again. And then say, by the way, when I was in town, I met whosoever who did this, and then the story now goes back to town, yet you're already at home. So that is the problem where it is. I mean, that is where the problem is. And then here, instead, the sequence of events, it says that if you have carefully planned your composition, then it will be easy to follow it. All right? It will be easy for the reader to follow those sequence of events, the events that are happening. If you wake up in the morning, maybe you begin there, you wake up in your planning, okay, you say you wake up, you do your chores, you know what you are supposed to do, and that will be your chores at home. Maybe you prepare thereafter to go or to attend a particular event. This is the planning. You start from here. It's early in the morning while you are home here. And then after that, that is the beginning of your story. You take us to where maybe you get to town. If the most significant part of that particular story is maybe it happens in town, maybe you get to town, and then in town, give us the details. All right? When you get to town, you're going to give us the details of what happened, who did what did you see, what did you hear, what did you smell, and everything. That give us the details there. Who did you meet? The people, the characters that you met in town, and then again you advance this setting. Now you are in town. You're from home. You went to town, and then in town, these are the things that you did, and then in terms of the details. So basically, things you do in town, you're going to tell us that, and then after that, if you are to go back home, and then probably you did something that you're not supposed to do in town, and then the consequences of that are going to manifest when you get back home, then you can then take us back home. All right? And then when you take us back home, then there you probably tell us about the consequences of your action. Whatever actions you did when you get to town. So those consequences of your actions there, you can then tell us about that. But of course, whatever that you'll be writing should be connected to the prompt, should be connected to the title of your composition. All right? It shouldn't be something that we try to find out and say, okay, how is this related to what you are trying to tell us or to the main subject of your composition as prescribed, or rather as directed by the question that you've selected in your question paper. All right, that is your paper to continuous writing. So we are looking at a narrative. We said that it is important to plan your narrative so that it follows a sequence of events. All right. And then again, another thing that makes it easy, and it is crucial that you do it, when you write a narrative and you are making sure that it follows a certain sequence of events, is that this sequence of events, basically, we are saying that there should be a certain chronology. So your essay writing should be in chronological order. And to help you achieve this, you need to use what is called, we call them time fixers. So we call these time fixers or time adverbials. So these, if you use these, in fact, it's important that you have them. It is a requirement that you use your narrative. Whenever you tell a story, you have to use time fixers and adverbials in your writing, because that is one thing that they'll be looking for. That is one thing that the marker, in this case, will be looking for, because you are telling a story, and in that story, it is a requirement that you tell it in a chronological order. And then in that chronological order, we said that your storytelling should do what? Your storytelling should involve a logical sequence of events. So if you say it is a logical sequence of events, so something that is logical is that logically things have to happen this way. You cannot say that I woke up and then I went to town, I came back, I took a bath and everything. So a logical sequence of events is that you'll be expected to wake up, maybe brush your teeth, take a bath, have breakfast, whatever that follows, and then you can leave instead of having things jumbled up. All right, so that is a logical sequence of events. This may happen after this has happened. All right, you can don't just mix things up. And then that sequence gives us the chronology. It has to be in a chronological order. That, okay, this happened after this, and then after this, this is what happened. And then, having explained this, while I'm explaining this, I think you should have picked up already some of the time fixes or time adverbials that you have to use while you tell or you give the plot of your story. All right. After the break, we're going to look at the examples of some of time fixes that you can use, or time adverbials that we can use. For now, let's go to the break and we shall get back.
I can't sit. I can't sit.
Welcome back. Before we went to the break, we were looking at telling a story that involves a logical sequence of events, and then we said that that logical sequence of events is basically telling the story in chronological order. And then for you to be able to tell a story in chronological order, there are certain phrases and words that you have to use that the marker expects you to use when telling a narrative composition. All right, so we said that those are time fixers or time adverbials. So either of the two, it is fine. It's just different words that are meant to, or rather used to refer to kind of the same things that have got the same purpose, all right, whenever we use them in the English language. All right, so we said that we are going to look at examples of time fixes and examples of time adverbials. All right, so here, there's one that you can use, look at, is maybe when you say you use then. When you use then, you are basically telling us that this happened in the story, and then this followed. All right, so then is important because it tells us that this happened after this. And then again, another one that you can use, it's this one, and say thereafter. That's another one that you can use. There's another one that you can use here. It's after that. So that's another one that you can use when you say after that. And then when you say maybe soon after, it is another time fixer that you can use, or time adverbial that you can use to show that this event happened soon after a particular event happened. And soon after, basically it's immediately, which is another one time fixer that you can use. When you say something happened immediately, so it happened immediately. We know where you are in that particular space in time, and then when you said it happened immediately, basically you are telling us that, okay, fine, there was no much time in between the two different events that happened. So this one happened soon after, or it happened immediately. All right. So you can also use this one and say later. So later, it's another time fixer that you can use. There's so many of them. Even this one, this popular one, which is suddenly. That's another time fixer that you can use. Suddenly. So that's another time fixer that you can use there. So when you say something happened suddenly, and then you can say something lasted momentarily. So all of those, these are examples of the time fixers that are going to help you. Not only these, of course, there's so much of them. These are just examples. These are some of those that you can use to make sure that your story follows a certain sequence of events. It follows a certain chronology of events. And then once you use these, obviously, you cannot just fix them somewhere and put them somewhere where they do not fit. All right? So when you use then, when you use thereafter, basically you are telling a story, and then it is easy for the reader, it is easy for the marker to be able to do it, to follow your story, because we know that this happened after that, and then this happened after, this happened after, and then later this is what happened, and then suddenly there was a stroke of light, a flash of lightning. So if it happens so sudden, and then it's going to be so sudden even to the reader, and then it's going to grab the attention and say, okay, fine, if suddenly this what happens, then what next? All right, so we are able then to anticipate as readers, and it is important that once we do that, as readers, once we anticipate what is going to come up next, it means that your storytelling is good. It means that your story, it is easy to follow. Okay, so now let's continue with our discussion. So we've been looking at the chronology of events, and then we said that for you to be able to achieve this in your writing, you should use time fixers or time adverbials, and then these are examples of some time fixers or time adverbials that you may use for your writing rather. So let's continue while still looking at what we are still looking at a narrative composition, and then we said that a narrative story, it is one that is told by a particular person from a particular perspective, involving a logical sequence of events, and then those events therefore are carried by what? Are carried by what we referred to earlier as the characters. And then characters, we said these are the people who live in the story. All right, these are the people who inhabit your world that you have created in that particular story. Okay, so it is very, very important that a story should have characters, and then these characters, the one important thing about these individuals, the certain individuals that we are creating, is that these certain individuals should be believable. Just like the story, these individuals should be believable. They should do things that are realistic. We don't want to read a story that sounds like a fairy tale. All right? We don't want to read a story where we'll have people flying. All right? Where we'll have people knocking down cars. That is not the way to go. So create characters that are going to do things. First, the characters themselves, they have to be believable, and they have to do actions, or rather their actions also have to be believable because they are realistic. It is something that can really, really happen. Okay, so that is important again. Create believable characters that do realistic things. They shouldn't be, we don't want necessarily to have Supermen, the Supermans and Superwomens maybe, and also Superwomen, that is, and also maybe different superheroes that you know, maybe from television, they do the things that we see on television. No, we want a realistic world here. We want to see characters that do believable things, characters that do realistic things. And these characters, while you tell the story, involve characters that are central to the unfolding of the events in the story. Don't just, because we tend to, in fact, we teach you as teachers that when you write a story, make sure that in your narrative, you include all the senses. That is all the 5 senses. Make sure that you include descriptions, details, and descriptions of people, descriptions of places, and everything. Yes, it is true. You need to do that. But whenever you choose to describe a certain person, don't just describe the certain person for the sake of describing, because it is necessary for you to do it. Once you say in your writing, for example, then I then saw a huge man approaching, so dark in complexion, had a big scar on her left cheek, and he looked like he had come straight from prison. Wherever you are, I'd expect that in that story, that person you have just described, that character you have just decided to include in your story, and then you have given details about that character, is going to somehow have an influence or an effect to the outcome of the events in the story. So I wouldn't expect to read about that description, and then while I continue reading the story, I don't find this person anywhere else in the story. All right? You just described it because it is someone you met on the way. Give specific details to characters that play a central role. If you are in a party, because most of the students, they like creating stories where they are involved somehow in a party or wherever, in a certain fun event. If someone approached and then you choose to focus on that person while he makes that grand entrance and everything, it means that that particular character you've created is going to have to play an important role in whatever outcome of that particular event, rather. So it is important that you give details or specific details of things that play a key role in your story, not just for the sake of doing it. All right, so we say that the characters should be believable, they should do realistic actions. All right, so that is important when it comes to your characters. And then again, to make your story interesting, these characters, they should once in a while be involved in some sort of dialogue. So they should be involved in some form or sort of dialogue. So they should be involved, or rather, we'll say they should be involved in dialogue. And then that is important again. It creates that interest in your reader. Let's hear people talking. And that is where you're going to involve dialogue. And it is important whenever you involve dialogue that showing dialogue will mean you're going to use, it requires that you involve direct speech. And remember everything about direct speech. The punctuation is important. When you involve or include direct speech in your writing, which is important, because we say that you have the characters, they need to be involved in some sort of dialogue. Then that dialogue will be shown in a form of what? Of direct speech. And then that direct speech, remember to punctuate it correctly. Most of us, as learners, we do remember to open the quotes because we are writing a direct speech. But then somehow we forget to close them to show that this is the end of that quotation. or of that direct speech by whoever character was saying that. And then now if it continues, it is someone else is about to speak. All right, so it is important that that happens. So make sure that you never forget to do the right thing, which is punctuate your direct speech correctly using exclamation marks. If you get into the room and then your father shouts at you, say, "Where have you been?" So we don't necessarily expect that you're going to write, for example, let's say you open quotes there. Okay, I'll take that to the bottom here, and I'd say, okay, fine, you open quotes. So this is the question. So you open quotes, you close quotes. Where have you been? And then there'll be a full stop. This is a question. So if it is a question, it requires that you do the right thing and punctuate it correctly with what? With a question mark. All right? When someone shouts, "Help," you cannot just say help, help. When you say help, you are shouting. And then when you're shouting, use an exclamation mark. So the correct punctuation to show that this is what was happening, because you are capturing the moment. All right? You don't necessarily have to tell everything, but you need to show, which is one important art of narrating, where it said one important rule is that make sure that you do not tell us what happened, but you show us what happened. All right? In your words. Don't tell us exactly that whoever was shouting help. By mere inclusion of this exclamation mark, it says that the tone was a bit high. It says that this person was shouting. All right? So instead of saying help, help, full stop, then you said shouted. It doesn't necessarily carry the same meaning. Okay, so it is important that you show instead of telling us what happened. So the characters, we say that they need to be believable. All right, so in your story. So your story will be, the events there that are happening in the story will be carried out by certain individuals. Continuing further, in our narrative, we also want to look at those individuals that you've created. Everything that is happening there, where the characters are, should happen in a specific time and place. So there we are. It is in a specific time and place. So this is important. Specific time. So the word specific, like I said earlier, needs to be underlined there, because the things that are happening there are happening in a specific time and a specific place. Which means that for us readers, it is important that we know where the story takes place. All right? And when the story takes place. So time, basically, it's not necessarily the clock time that it happened at 12 minutes past 9. No. But when we refer to time, we are referring to when did this happen. Did it happen at night, during the day? Did it happen early in the morning, or in the morning, late in the morning, late in the afternoon? So basically that time, we need to be able to follow it. If you have followed the conventions of writing a narrative by using time fixes and time adverbials, as we said, and then if your story is in chronological order, it is easy for the reader to follow it, and you should keep reminding the reader at what time was it at a particular time. Like I said, not necessarily the clock time, but then maybe later on that day, no matter late in the afternoon, on that evening, or at night. So that is important, so that we know when are things happening, and is it realistic that you should have gone through all of this within that certain period of time. Okay, so that is also important. And also the place. The place, basically here, it tells us where. All right, it tells us where did these things happen. One important thing that some of the students get to do which is not necessarily encouraged, is that, just going back a bit to the characters, you tend to create characters, create names, name the people with foreign names, such that you'd have characters that have got names like, maybe there'll be Camila, there'll be names like Matilda, there'll be names like maybe Fabio. All of these names of the characters, it says to me, the reader who is here in Swaziland, by the way, probably this story that you're writing, you took it from somewhere else. You probably read a book or a novel, a story somewhere, and then you remember the characters, the names of the characters there, and then now you are merely reproducing what happened there. All right? So it doesn't convince me that your story is original, which is a key thing. Make sure that whenever you write a story, a narrative story, it is original one. So create original characters. All right? So these foreign characters, they are not necessarily wrong, but they are not so convincing that the story is of your own creation. There is nothing wrong with writing a story in the English language and have characters such as Sibongile, have characters such as Musa, because these are names that we are familiar here. So if you have characters such as Musa, it is easy to believe for the reader that this story is original. It is not just a mere reproduction of a story that happened. So, which takes me again to the setting. Here, the setting, make sure that the setting should be local. Make sure that your setting is local. Just like you have to use local names. We are in Swaziland, so make sure that you create your story using a Swazi setting. So if there is nothing wrong, if your story happened at Ngaba, it is fine. Instead of having your story happen in Chicago, where probably you have never been, or having your story happen in maybe Johannesburg. So instead of having that story happen in Johannesburg or Chicago in the United States of America, localize it. Have your story happen where? In Manzini. There's nothing wrong with that if it requires that there should be a town. Okay? Because you are familiar with Manzini. You are familiar with Stegi. You are familiar with Tlatekulu or Pixpic. Have it happen there. If you are familiar with Smonye, have things happen in Smonye. So make sure that you always use a local setting instead of using what? A foreign one. Unless the prompt or the subject of your writing requires that it be so. Because one thing that is dangerous about this is that you're going to have a story that is set in Johannesburg, and then suddenly, while you are in Johannesburg, you go to the beach. Okay? And then the question would be, how do you go to a beach in Johannesburg? Because Johannesburg is in central South Africa. It is nowhere close to the beach. So it is easy to locate things in space and in time in a place which you are used to. So make sure that your story is, you employ what? You use a local setting and also create local characters, which means that you're going to use local names. All right? Instead of using these foreign names, like, for example, Camila, Matilda, Fabio, and everything, rather use Sbongile, Sbusiso, Musa, and everything. So those are local names that we are used to. All right? So make sure you avoid to use, you avoid using foreign settings, that surroundings that you are not familiar to. Use surroundings that are familiar to you, because once you use these, if they are local, you'll be able to give the necessary details as they are. because you're going to describe and you let the person, because we are local, the reader in this case is going to be a local person. You're going to ensure that the reader is able to visualize and imagine these things and see the different things. If you're talking about rivers, if you're talking about a certain pathway, you're talking about a certain forest, it is easy for you to describe the things in terms of space and in terms of time. When did this happen? And you're able to judge certain distances, you're able to judge certain things because you are using a local setting instead of if it's a journey from your local town, maybe home or maybe to school, it is easy to say, okay, fine, 25 minutes later, I was at school, all right? Rather than using a foreign setting where there is no real relation or correlation between the place you're traveling to and your place of departure. You see those things. So it's important that you use there's nothing wrong with it. It doesn't make it less interesting if you use a local setting and a local, maybe local characters, or that is local names of characters. So it is important that you do this. So yes, a story is one that is told, a narrative story is one that is told in a specific time and a specific place, which basically that means it is the setting of the story. Where is the story set? Where do these things happen and when do they happen? Okay. So that is that. Continuing, maybe looking at I'd say this is the concluding part of the lesson. Again, we're going to go back and say that the things that we have discussed, we said that a narrative. So in conclusion to our lesson, today we're looking at a narrative composition or writing a narrative story. Basically, this is the outline of what it is. And then for our next lesson, we are going to get deep into some of the things that we talked about, maybe give examples of the things that you need to do, of the things that we talked about, rather. Maybe we go to writing the introduction. How do we have to write our introduction in our narrative essay? And what are the things when you make sure that we want the story to follow a certain chronology? What are the things that we need to employ, and maybe give examples of that? But right today, this lesson was just about the outline of a narrative composition, what it is. And then we said that a narrative is a story that is told by a person. So this is the part, it is told by a person. And then in this case, we said that the person is you, the writer. And then as the writer, you are the narrator. And then from there, it is a story that is told by a person and is telling the story from a particular perspective. And then the particular perspective, we said that here we are basically referring to the point of view. And the point of view being, we said that it is wise to write a story using the first person where you experience the events yourself. And then there'll be the third person to refer to other people that are part of the story. And then also, that story should involve a logical sequence of events. And then we said here what is important is that you are able to use time fixers. We said it is important that you are able to use time fixers because your story should follow a certain chronology. That should be that one, a chronology of events. And then you are going to achieve that chronology of events if you are able to use time fixers or time adverbials, such as soon after, such as suddenly, such as a moment later or later. So, and again, it is a story that is carried out by certain individuals being the characters that you choose to create, that are going to be in your story. And make sure that you don't create so many characters, because those characters, they have the characters that you create, they should be characters that are going to be important or significant in your story or in the outcome of your particular story. And then we said that it is important to create characters that are local. All right, using local names, it makes your story more believable than maybe thinking that it is a story that has been lifted from a certain book or from somewhere else. And then again, we said that that story in a narrative, it should be told, or rather it should be in a specific time and place. And then we said that this is the setting. of your story. And your setting too, make sure that this is a setting that is local. Use an area that you are familiar to, the surroundings you are familiar with, because you're going to be able to describe things in space and again in time. All right, so that is important. And again, for a particular purpose. So whenever you tell a story, you tell it for a particular purpose. If your purpose, we said in our introductory part, maybe that the different purposes that we can, or rather that we tell stories for, would be maybe you want to create fear. So if you want to create fear, the purpose is to create fear. Make sure that in your writing, the descriptions that you use, the details that you give, they create that fear. And then we said that one art of writing, or of any writing rather, in descriptions, maybe in narratives, is that you need to show instead of tell. Don't tell us that this person is beautiful. Rather describe the beauty in the person so that we know that, okay, fine, we can tell ourselves, or maybe conclude that, okay, fine, this person was beautiful. Don't tell us that the person was angry. Your punctuation of the things that he says using direct speech should tell us that the person is angry. All right, so make sure that in your particular purpose, whether you inform, whether you entertain, whenever you create fear, whether you educate, that purpose is fulfilled using that art of showing instead of telling. We're going to end our lesson here for today, where we have been looking at a narrative essay. Let us meet again in our next lesson, where we're going to be looking deep again into a narrative, just before we then look at what? At a descriptive essay. So make sure that you don't miss that one as we continue this lesson for today. Thank you very much for joining us. Wishing you a good viewing in everything else that is to follow here. Thank you.